It's my great honor to serve as a session chair of the next Fair Chat session on science competitiveness and public service. And so this is a special session. And so this conversation brings together two remarkable leaders and scientists who share a rare distinction. And they have not only made a substantial contribution to science, but also serve our national leading science agency leaders. And together they are going to discuss how to sustain the scientific leadership and innovation in the US, and also the federal funding agencies' roles and challenges and opportunities, and also how the recruitment and retention of talent, and to return the leadership of US science technologies, and also inspire the next generation and to be engaged to become leaders in science technology, and also serve the public. So our moderator is Secretary Steven Chu, and who is a Nobel Prize winner physicist, and he served as the 12th United States Secretary of Energy, and leading our nation's clean energy innovation. And also, Steve also is on AASF Leadership Council. And so he is joined by the Director Panchanathan, and who is a distinguished computer scientist and also academic leader. He served as the 15th director of the US National Science Foundation, guiding the agency through one of the most consequential periods in the history. And so he is a cherished friend of the AASF, and so under his leadership, and so AASF partnered with NSF and launching the Pioneer Project. And so this basically paved the road and for the Pioneer Medal award ceremony you saw yesterday. And so it's my great honor to welcome Secretary Chu and Director Panchanathan.
I'm going to be really careful and not try to pronounce his name, and just call him by his nickname, Ponch.
Yes, Ponch is perfect. Yes.
But you know, he was nominated by President Obama to be on the National Science Board, National Science Foundation, and remarkably, President Trump nominated him to be the director of the NSF, and he was confirmed unanimously on June of 2020, and he assumed office. So, but before we start, maybe you can spend 1 or 2 minutes just talking a little bit more about yourself and your journey.
Thank you, Secretary Chu. I mean, it's truly an honor to have you in this conversation. I think we're going to address many of the issues that people are thinking about, worrying about, and hopefully also hopeful about. You know, my journey started as, I always say that for me, a defining moment, and we'll come to this in the context of talent, I guess. My defining moment was when I was an 8-year-old boy, and I'll age myself now. The Apollo 11 mission had returned back with the moon rocks, and the moon rocks were circulated all around the globe. And I was this 8-year-old in Chennai, India, and my father, who's an astrophysicist and a professor, took me to see these exhibits. And I saw those moon rocks, and I was just taken by that. I was so excited to hear this young boy ask the question, should I go? Should I listen to my mom? I mean, it's just so reminiscent of the fact that, I stood in this huge line in the consulate, not for getting a visa to go and see a moon rock. And it was a very sort of profound moment. And I can even recall today the awe that I had. Yes, it is just a rock. That's true. But what it took for the rock to be seen by this 8-year-old is just a phenomenal thing that became an inspiration for me. And I know millions and millions of people are inspired by that. I was telling Carolyn Kennedy, Ambassador Kennedy, when she was visiting NSF, how her father's work inspired generations and generations and millions of people. So I think that's what this is about. So I'll just stop there. You said 1 or 2 minutes. I think we all look for that inspiration. We all look to carry that kind of inspiration all through our life. And we all want to make sure that the young boy and many, many young children are inspired so that they might become this fantastic scientist like our Nobel laureate, Steven Chu. Wouldn't that be the best situation?
You're too kind. Anyway, so I want to start by having you recall the time you were at the NSF. It was really some rough sledding. There was a pandemic. There's very rapid technological change, and being more concerned, more aware of international competition. So looking back, was there a moment that changed how you thought about leadership, and what did it teach you about leading American research enterprises?
That's a very good question. When I went to NSF, there are two things that I carried with me. The experiences in Arizona, where I found that talent and ideas, we all agree with this, but it was so profoundly present in the institution that I was at. Talent and ideas are democratized, but opportunities are not. And this is a fact. This is a fact even today. And I wanted NSF, which has been an exemplar of bringing out these brilliant ideas, manifesting in the form of Nobel laureates, or right here, the founding of Google and other companies. Okay, whatever that might be. How do we ensure that we can scale and unearth every bit of talent? This was something that I really wanted NSF to play a role in. The other thing that I've noticed is that how little, and this has become even more the case today, is the work of scientists and the work of the scientific community being recognized for what the progress that we see today in the United States, or anywhere in the world for that matter. And that's primarily because of the fact that we have not been able to, and we'll come to some parts of the discussion later, I hope, is the fact that the translational component was not explicit. The discovery component was explicit. The translational component was implicit. And so I felt the need that we need to make sure that people understand that the discovery component, which is explicit, results in explicit impact and translation that happens too. And I wanted that to be expressed in its fullest form by not compromising on discovery, but by augmenting and being additive, not by taking away from anything. And that's why I envisioned this, the new Directorate of Technology Innovation Partnerships. I'm sure we'll talk about that more, through which I wanted to show that we are in the business of technology innovation through partnerships, in addition to what we do in terms of unbelievably making possible discovery to flourish, and that they are all connected and intertwined.
Well, let's continue on this theme about what you did in establishing the Directorate for Technology Innovation Partnerships. The NSF has always been pioneering in funding basic research, but what you added was something very important, very different, and also would help justify continued funding.
Yes.
So
I would like to talk about that more. I mean, you are Secretary of Energy. One of the fantastic things that the Department of Energy does is it does some very fundamental work in science, in the national labs, and makes possible other parts of the country. But it also does unbelievable translational work that we all benefit from, whether it is renewable energy, whether it is the traditional forms of energy. How do you make that all possible, right? When you look at Department of Energy, you don't think of it as either this or that. It is and, right? And for me, the cue that I took was I looked at the trajectory of NSF funding over the last 5 decades, the growth of NSF funding. And I would characterize it as maybe a 2 to 3% on an annual basis, a growth which is good. And I found that the mood was, if the Congress funded, and remember Congress funds, okay? I want people to remember this. We'll come back and revisit this. That's a reality. And so if we got a 3% or a 5%, it was a winning year. It's a boom year. Whereas if we were not getting any funding increase, it's okay. At least they didn't cut us. If they cut us, it is not a good year. That's how we were looking at the world. And I looked at the journey of NIH at the same time. And NIH, in the same 5 decades, has probably grown 5-fold, whereas NSF grew by 2 to 3% every year. And I asked the question, why is this difference? Because both of them are doing unbelievable work on behalf of the scientific community as well as on behalf of the people of the country. What is it that distinguishes the two agencies that it gets this much attention for Congress to feel that it wants to invest this much in NIH? And I strongly encourage that that investment should be even more. And so it is not anything about NIH's growth. Why is NSF not viewed that way? And it turns out that when you say, I am going to cure cancer, I am going to cure Alzheimer's, I am going to cure diabetes, tell me which citizen or a congressman or a senator or any administrative folks cannot relate to that in their own family. They will know a family or a friend who has a problem and they'll say, hallelujah, let's go and get that done. Right? And let's get it done. Even in tough years, it's important for the health of our nation. But by the same token, NSF's work, the great work that researchers like, Steven Chu and all of you, all of us, when we do, they are not seen the same way. Yet we have translational impact, yet we do something which does, not all of that has to go to translational impact. Not all of what NIH funds becomes translational. Let's be very clear about that. Not all what DOE funds is translational. It's quite the opposite, right? But yet, it is tangible and it is possible to express it in that form. So I said, if I have to get NSF to be seen as a place where investment has to grow because the ideas and the talent are, prolific and it's all over the place to be unearthed, why not articulate this in this form that essentially gets that done? So that was the motive behind creation of this Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate. First motive. Second, and this I think is very important, when you look at the future of investments, yes, federal investments are exceedingly important, and we have to articulate the value of it. You have to fight for it with value proposition being outlined, and we need to get the investments, appropriate investments made. That's true, but I can tell you for certainty that whatever the federal investment will be, it will still not be enough. And therefore, we are living in a new world order. And that world order is, how do we find other sources of investment as collateral investments? How do we join hands together with industry, with other agencies, with foundations, with other entities? And in my case, in the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate, when we created the Regional Innovation Engine program, is to bring the economic development interest of various regions and co-investment. And all of the investments now leveraging and energizing the fundamental discovery research. That was the rationale for doing that. And it worked. In the first year, we got a significant jump, $1 billion increased, because I could articulate that, we could articulate the value of that. But yes, we are going through some difficult times. But I want to caution people that, again, back to the point that I made about who invests. Last year, there was this, an understandable angst in people. It's going to be cut by half, it's going to be cut by 60% or whatever it is, or 40%, 30%. But at the end of the day, Congress will prevail, and Congressman talked about it even here today in the latest Senate version of the continuation bill, that Congress fights hard because there is bipartisan support in Congress for science and research. And therefore, we may not get the increases that we are looking for, but it is not also at the same time massive decreases. And let's hope that we keep it that way. But we have a role to play, each one of us, and I'll come to that later, in terms of what can we do in order to raise the awareness and make it relatable to the common man. Because remember, he talked about votes. Votes are not just scientists voting. These are common people voting. If they don't understand, and how will they be able to support it? And we think they should understand, and that's not good enough.
So in listening to you talk about the NSF and NIH, it reminds me of many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was asked by the then head of NIH, Harold Varmus. But before, he said he wanted me to appear in a congressional hearing. And I said, well, why? And he said, because you're a physicist, but if you can tell people in Congress how important it is to make advances in healthcare, and I'm thinking about this, I'm saying, maybe we should now reverse the role. Because if you think about all the advances in healthcare, underlying this many, many times are new methods, new techniques that come out of science and engineering that were not stimulated initially by healthcare, but it's those new things. And if you look at the last 3/4 of a century, it really revolutionized molecular biology, healthcare, everything.
Everything.
And so perhaps we should get the NSF and others to enlist the NIH and says, we're forming the basis of your knowledge. And this is very important because that is not fully appreciated.
I cannot agree with you more. You're absolutely correct about that. Let me give you the example because this is a topic of the day, AI. I keep reminding people, AI of today, thanks to work by Professors Lee and others, Kylie and others, I'm so delighted to see him here. He's like a god. So when you look at the work of AI, it is not what happened in the last decade, not even last 2 decades. It is 5 to 6 decades of sustained investment by NSF, which is 80% of the non-defense research in computer science is NSF investments. Sustained investments. I often remind people, even during AI winters, when people were skeptical, NSF continued to invest in that. And you talked about the physics. Let's look at quantum of today. Where would quantum be without the unbelievable work in physics and math and chemistry and others? We would not be here where we are today. So let's not forget the fact, I keep reminding people wherever I go, all of that investment of several decades is coming to meet the moment today that we are all talking about it. Everybody's engaged in it, and people are thinking about how can we make it prosperous, notwithstanding the challenges that was brought up in terms of what guardrails have to be put in place, kill switches, etc. We get that. We get that. Okay? So I remind people, therefore, that what is being funded today by NSF, by Department of Energy, and NIH, and DARPA, and DOD, and others, they don't have labels today. Like quantum was not a label, or AI was not a label several decades ago. We are funding those ideas today, but there is little recognition of the fact that just because they don't have labels, somehow they don't matter. And so I go back and talk about this again and again. You are here today because of these labels, and these labels happened because of decades of sustained investment. What our great researchers are doing at Stanford, at Arizona State and others, and the national labs are label-less right now, but they will get those labels and they will be the pioneering technology in 2050, 2070, 2090, and 2100. So let's not stop hyper-investing in these people and ideas.
So I want to shift just slightly and talk about, there's often a discussion, I think it's a false discussion, about the conflict between more applied areas and applied sciences versus very fundamental sciences. I personally think this is a continuum. And I want to start with a story. I was on a committee called Rise Above the Gathering Storm, that in this committee, that report that was in 2005, and the committee sent me to Congress to try to sell in 2006 the idea to start a new funding agency called RPE. And so I was there at RPE, but I was also sent to the Department of Energy to try to convince the then Secretary of Energy, Sam Bodman, who was a great guy, to embrace this. But he told me, no, Congress bought it, they authorized it, it was very successful. But then Sam Bodman said, well, I think what you're doing is right, I agree with it, but the people in my Department of Energy, and particularly Office of Science, felt that if we embraced more applied science, like what was happening in RPE, it would crowd out basic research. And I want you to address this, because I think this is just wrong thinking.
Yes.
But I want you to expand on that.
So when I went to NSF, I'm so glad you asked this question. One of the first things that I did when I went to NSF is I make up stuff, as you can probably realize by now. I said, let me make up something called the DNA of NSF. The DNA of NSF has 2 strands, highly interwoven and intertwined. I fundamentally feel that the 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, TRL1, TRL9 kind of conceptualization has merit in one sense. But what it has done is it has distanced this relationship between, the symbiotic relationship between discovery research and translational outcomes. So I said that this DNA of NSF is made up of these twin pairs intertwined. One of the pairs is what I call curiosity-driven, discovery-based explorations. The other strand that intertwines it is use-inspired, solutions-focused innovations or translations. And that discovery and innovations and translations are an intertwined relationship. If you go back and look at, and I had many examples that for NSF to do this over the ages to show that if you started working on this, this translation happened, this translation caused this, challenged this discovery, that discovery resulted in this translation. So it is not one way, it is highly symbiotic. And the disservice that we have done is to give this impression that you do discovery research, you get translational outcome, and that's it. And that's not just it. Yes, in some cases that is it. But in large cases, it is that translation that demands more discoveries. That symbiosis is what we should be talking about. Therefore, an ARPA-E or a DARPA really is doing the service of challenging the DOE Office of Science, NSF and others to say, what more discovery research do we need to do, because we still have not got the right solution or the optimal solution or no solution at all. If we don't organize ourselves this way, we will face the peril that we are facing right now. The temptation to focus everything on this end. There is no end, folks. There's only one thing. This misconception, I think we have to just get that out of the practice. And even amongst us, I think we need to come to a sort of a convergence on this and how we talk about it, how we express it. I think it's very important.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, but let me shift gears and talk a little bit about the state of science, technology writ large, but really focusing on what has happened. The United States has great research universities. It had a very open culture. Many people come from abroad. They come here, particularly graduate school, postdoctoral things, and they fall in love with the country, and they stay. And yet we see pushback on this. And so I want you to comment about how this is at risk, perhaps, that this ability to attract very talented people, and particularly for this community, if I think of the amount of, if I look at Silicon Valley, and I look at, and if I take away the Asian community part of Silicon Valley, notably the Chinese, the Indians, but Asia writ large, okay. I would say, for example, I'm an advisor to Applied Materials. Half the workforce is gone, maybe 2/3. It's remarkable. And so here we are, and I'm comment to the fact that I'm very worried that people in Congress don't really realize what is at stake here if we begin to discourage people from looking upon the United States as a welcoming nation, that they can come, they can go back to their home country, or they can stay. Yes. And so comment about that.
Yes. So when I went to NSF, I recognized that at the time that I went, there was already this feeling of, that's global stuff, this is national stuff. We need to focus more national. So I looked at the issue and I said, what is the underlying issue, the problem that is being talked about here? And it turns out it is the following, and I tried to articulate it this way wherever I went during my term as NSF director, and then now I do that, continue to do that. I think the fundamental problem is the following, I believe. I do not believe, before I come to the foreign talent, okay? I do not believe that we have inspired, nurtured, motivated, and brought to life every ounce of domestic talent in every part of our country. Okay? By that I mean rural urban areas, across the broad socioeconomic demographic, and across the rich diversity of our nation. Shame on us. Okay? Now, what have we done? I think if I were to summarize it, what we have done is we have welcomed global talent and substituted for the lack of unearthing every ounce of domestic talent. Okay? And it has worked very well for us. That's the right thing to do in terms of bringing in global talent, that piece. But what we have done, in my view at least, is that it has largely been a substitution process. What I fundamentally believe that we need to do is that we need to do both at the same time. It is not a substitution process, but an additive process. We need to take responsibility for unearthing every ounce of domestic talent in the country, and we need to welcome, retain every ounce of global talent here, and that the combination of both is what this nation needs if you want to outcompete by out-innovating any nation on earth.
So
I suggest we start talking like that. If we isolate the global part and only focus on that, we may not listen. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a very practical person. I feel that if you want to get the job done, then articulate it as it should be, because it's the right thing to do, smart thing to do, and that's what the country needs. And I want to say that as much as I care about, and there's two examples sitting right here and all of you there, we were brought here because of the unbelievable meritocracy that permeates this nation. Unbelievable thread of innovation and entrepreneurial mindset, and excellence being the way in which we advance things. That's why we came, that's why we stayed, and that's why we were able to do what we were able to do, and that's why we, and I'm including Steve here, I felt that I had to go and serve.
So that actually, I want you to expand a little bit on that. I mean, because the Asians, immigrants in general, but Asians are viewed, oh, they're good really technically, they're scientists, engineers, and companies, they're professors in universities, they're very nerdy sorts of people, but they didn't have a place in the mindset of the public saying they too could be part of the political system and political leaders. And so talk a little bit about this and what is really missing in that, and what should our generation, but most importantly, the next generation do in order to get this so that we're not, I'm not just to try to see public service in a very colorblind way.
I find that, maybe one day you'll invite me to talk about higher education and what it should be. I've been thinking a lot about that. I find that we are not doing justice to our students coming into the university system because we are so focused on skill sets rather than mindsets. Okay, and that's a whole different conversation. I'm going to write an op-ed on that and all. So one of the mindsets, Steve, is this mindset of public service. If you don't cultivate that mindset, nurture that mindset in K-12 and the university, you will not find people who would go and serve just for the joy of serving and making a difference. We all have to step up and do our part. It's not Steve, it's not me, it's not XYZ, Kai, it's all of us. All of us have to do this with full commitment. So that's the first point I will make. Now, let me say where this all starts. We are facing the music because we have done a very lousy job as scientists, engineers, technologists. We have done a lousy job talking about the importance, the impact, and the investment, therefore, the 3 I's that we need for science. Because if I ask each one of you to say in an elevator speech what you're doing and how it actually impacts the common person, this audience may be perfect. But wherever I go around the country, I find that it's very hard for people to articulate in a few sentences how the public is impacted by your work or could be impacted by your work. First, therefore, I think we all need to learn, and I always say, when you point a finger at somebody, how is it that they don't understand the importance of science? There are 3 fingers pointing back at you.
So So I want to leave 10 minutes for people to line up at the microphones.
Yes.
Which means you have only 2 minutes to answer the next question. What message would you want to leave the university leaders, the current researchers, the next generation, and what they should do about shaping the future of American science and also their responsibilities for doing this? I mean, you touched upon this already.
I think transformation, this is the time for transforming higher education. In large parts, you can think of higher education as not having changed. Yes, we have adapted, we have evolved, but not transformed enough in the last 2 centuries. This is the time for transformation, and technology is a great asset in that context. But it's not just about technology. It's about mindsets and skill sets, and we'll talk another day about that. I think every higher education leader really, I think, this is a moment where always adversity is a way in which you take it and transform things, rework things, because that gives you a chance to do better, smarter, with better outcomes.
Yes, the old saying, never waste a crisis.
Never waste a crisis, exactly.
But question for you?
This is Amy Gao. I am a 10th grade high schooler.
Wow.
So it is my great honor to hear your speeches. And my question is that in the age of AI, all students are using AI in their study and research projects. And we have heard warnings how chatbots can make people lazy. At the same time, we also heard that top researchers make breakthrough with the help of AI. So my question is to you both professors. So what is your advice to our generation on using AI in study and research?
Okay. You want to take
Well,
it first?
let me start. I say it can be very constructive. I use AI all the time, every day. I use it as a super Google search. So I'll pose questions, but it's also to realize and I use all 3 of them, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and compare them, but also enter in a conversation that says, okay, here it is, this is what you can learn. But also, in answer to your question, my big fear, so I would say to young people, it's a great asset, but my big fear is you will ask it to do your own writing. And I cannot stress how important writing is, clear writing, because in the process of learning how to write, you're learning how to think and put your ideas in a linear form. If you get AI to write for you, you are going to miss that. And that's my big fear for this newer generation. If they're asking AI to write their papers, then they won't learn how to think.
I would add to that in the following way. I often tell people come and tell me, but students are cheating. I said, then you're not setting the right question papers if they can cheat with AI. So you might want to look inward and say, are we challenging the students enough? So for me, in addition to what I agree completely with what Steve said, but here is how you think about AI. AI is augmenting the individual AI. AI helps you to advance ideas, analyze ideas, okay, and accelerate innovation and achieve impact, all AI, okay? So this is an unbelievable asset, but should be used appropriately. And part of that responsibility is not just you as a student, is also your teachers, the school system, your parents. It's a combined effort. It's not one versus the other. The technology is here for the community to see how best it can serve the needs for an enriched outcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent interview, and thanks for bringing up the topic of underrepresentation of native-born people in higher education, especially at the graduate level. If we go back to not so distant memory, but whether it is railroad or better grain elevators, they were built with mostly native talent. What, in your perspective, has caused this shift that the replacement started happening, and how we can reverse it?
I think, it is a systemic taking for granted. When progress is happening, what you do is you don't always focus on the problems. And in a sense, what happened was there was this industrial revolution, the post-industrial revolution. Then you had the blue-collar jobs and the white-collar jobs. And people were very happy in their environments, being able to have a good life. And that was all great. But when the manufacturing started to shift overseas 3-4 decades ago, and jobs got hollowed out, and the blue-collar people took a much more higher hit relative to the white-collar folks, then this ugliness started to show much more between what the lack of domestic progress versus what, So this was viewed, unfortunately, negatively, and the consequences are a feeling of resentment. And I'm saying, let's go back to the fundamentals of what the problem was. Let's fix that.
And
I hope I answered the question.
yeah, you did, but I'll give the
Yes.
opportunity to the next one and follow up with
Yes, talk to me afterwards, yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you for the energizing discussion. Also, Professor Panchanathan, we met when you were NSF director
Yes.
3 years ago
Yes.
with, I think, Senator Schumer.
Yes.
So I invest in dual-use technologies as a venture capitalist, but I also was a political appointee with the Small Business Administration. So I've deployed all kinds of capital, dilutive and non-dilutive.
Yes.
My question is around the current state of funding for this next generation of deep technologies. So we are seeing historic levels of venture capital, right? Financing next generation energy breakthroughs, data centers, space technologies. The majority of that funding a lot of it's actually coming from the private capital and the private credit markets. And you're also seeing the Department of War take equity stakes, right, in companies like L3Harris. These are kind of unique. And I'm a believer that capital co-authors the trajectory of these companies and these technologies. So I'd love to just get each of your takes on maybe just the challenges and opportunities of the current funding landscape, right? Like these things are happening anyways, but how you think that's going to affect the next 10, 20, and 30 years of frontier technology development.
Why don't you?
Oh, okay. So, at NSF, as you know, that we have had historically SBIR, STTR programs. I'm a huge fan of that.
Same.
And that's now, I don't know whether all of you know, NSF was where SBIR, STTR program started. Now it's in every agency. That's what I used to tell people. As NSF director, I wanted to make sure that all of the great things that NSF did, including the Nobel laureates who were funded early in their career, 270 Nobel laureates, but who's counting? One of the best agencies for all of that, right? So back to your question, I think, the private venture capital is one of the blessings that we have in our country that really, truly, chooses the right technology or the emerging technologies that has the potential and funds it. There is some role for the government to play. In fact, sometimes people have asked me as NSF director in hearings, shouldn't we have NSF hold a small equity stake? Wouldn't that have solved your problem of investment on an annual basis? Look what you'd have done if you had 1% of Google or whatever it is. I said it's a very bad idea. Because our job in the federal government is to allow us to take more risks. And that's where we can play our best role, is to take those risks. And that risk then is what other people piggyback through private investments. Having said that, I'm happy to see that ARPA-E, DARPA, ARPA-H, and even some parts of DOW, all of these folks are starting to play more actively in this, including, as you said, equity stands and so on, which I think as long as we have a mixed bag of all of this, of solutions, it's a good thing. I don't want us to become so focused on returns that we lose sight of the fact that the discovery research investments gets hijacked or gets minimized or marginalized. That would be a bad thing for our country. So it's a mixed bag. Yeah. And we have to promote more incentives for people to want to invest in the private sector. Sorry.
To add to that, I agree with everything you said, but heavy investment industry, they have ideas of what they want. And so one of the things, I think the most important thing in federal funding is that at some level, in many areas, you want to give free license to have ground up, bubble up ideas. And that's really important. And if there's any simplification, I would say industry is more targeted, whereas I think some of the really best breakthroughs have come from bubble up ideas and license to say, stretch your imagination. I should say, for NSF, I was at Bell Labs for 9 years and I came to Stanford, and they funded me very well for many, many years. And even when I was going from atomic physics, laser cooling, trapping, atom interferometry into biology, they stuck with me. And they said, yeah, you can do this. You know, the referees started to grumble a little bit. But they said, no, we'll stick by you. Go for it. And so I'm very grateful that the AASF in those days gave principal investigators the freedom to go into new areas as well.
I hope that we will have more of that also. But in that context, if I can take one moment, the unbelievable work is done by the NSF staff, the program officers who do a phenomenal job. They are the ones that keeps that entire agency propelling. Directors come and go, but they are the ones that really work hard with all of the investigators, like you and others, to propel those ideas forward. So I'm most grateful to the NSF staff for doing a superb job.
So hi, thank you so much for this great discussion. My name is Mohammed Samavat. I did my PhD and postdoc with Terry Sinofsky at UC San Diego with background in engineering, statistics, and neuroscience. So I want to tell a challenge, an existing challenge, and would like to know what's your efforts at NSF and both your views on that. And it's about interdisciplinary research that you touched in the last comment. So one of I felt that with pain, having pure statistic, pure math, and pure neurobiology down to the cell biology, I wanted to see these two distinct words, two different words. They don't understand each other's jargons and want to know what's the efforts you are doing. So the biggest challenge is interdisciplinary research, and we don't see that is happening despite having data science department in all the universities in the United States. Still, the true interdisciplinary research is not being done. ALS, Alzheimer, cancer won't be cured until we have true interdisciplinary research. The current joint grants that they submit, faculties, still they do their own part in those multi-grants, and this is not true. They don't understand each other's problems. They just do their own piece. They are different words. They are disconnected, and you will see decades until we solve these neurodegenerative diseases and all these problems. I want to know how NSF and NIH together, or in some sense, push the scientists toward a true interdisciplinary research.
So that's a very, very good point. This is not just, you just can't mandate it. It's a culture issue.
Yeah.
Okay? You can facilitate it by investments. So NSF has invested significantly in the transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary kind of projects, solution-oriented projects and so on, in climate, in other areas. But what I will tell you is, at the end of the day, when I talk about culture and a mindset, it has to be groomed right at the level of the students. That's why I'm a huge fan. I was a PI of the program called IGERT, Interdisciplinary Graduate Education, Research and Training, subsequently the National Research Trainee Fellowship Program. I was an PI on both of them, where you are essentially, the students then are participating in interdisciplinary environment. Their topics are that way. Now they are infected with interdisciplinary mindsets, that then when they go out and do the work, they are likely to be truly interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary, rather than people who are trying to make it work because they want to execute a grant. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not enough. That is not, it is not sufficient. It is okay. So that's what I think needs to happen more of, and I think both agencies are investing in that. I would like to see more of those investment.
But let me add, it's not only an agency problem. I think it's part of the inertia and custom in universities. If you look at professors, it's centered around professors group and everything. And I have a very eclectic group, and I encourage them. They're allowed to go out and talk to other people, not even ask me for quote permission. Just find out what's going on. In establishing BioX, which was a mixture of science, physics, physical sciences, engineering, medicine, biology, we wanted to stick people together and have them rub shoulders in an informal way. And so you have to get the mindset, and the professors have to say, to encourage their people, spread your wings. Yes, you have to be specialized in something, and you have to be a world expert in order to get your PhD and your postdoctoral work and your job. But you also want to learn a little bit, about a little thing. So just in case you can make these connections, and it's those connections that become some of the biggest breakthroughs.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with him. When you solve these interdisciplinary problems, your disciplinary contributions can be phenomenal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Robert. I'm a rising junior at Stanford. I'm working on a project at Hoover on thinking about the foundations of the research enterprise, so I'd love to chat afterwards. I guess my question is, talking about the crisis, do you guys see yourself going back into the government to try to make an impact? And then also, if you were to, what would be like the first thing on your mind in your respective agencies? And then if you were in the other person's role, you were in the NSF and you were in DOE, what would you do differently, I guess?
I will tell you, I want all of you to go to NSF and serve, so I don't want to go again. Because there's no point in people going again and again. I think new ideas, new people, you are all the future. That's my response to that. Okay? If I go, I would want transformation of higher education. Learning should become the focus, not training and education as the thinking. So that's what I would like to see, and research being a core of everything.
If there was someone like President Obama again, and that person asked me, I would do it in a heartbeat. I think, I don't know, can we add one more, or you're looking nervous? Okay.
For a fantastic conversation, which has inspired many of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.